This meeting is now called to order. It is April 6, 2022, and the time is 6:36 p.m. Our mission is to provide a safe and caring climate and culture in which we engage, inspire, educate, prepare, and empower all learners and in partnership with their surrounding community to be successful in today's and tomorrow's society. Les, can you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Dr. Green. Then can you please call roll?
Scott Andreasen. Natalie Copeland.
Here.
Al Dahlgren is not present. Zach Dorholt is not present. Les Green is here. Shannon Hawes.
Here.
Monica Segura Schwartz.
Here.
The following cabinet members and staff are present at the District Administration Office: Superintendent Willie Jett, Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Education, Dr. Lori Putnam, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education, Dr. Mike Rivard, Executive Director of Operations, Gary Ganji, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services, Amy Scalarud, Executive Director of Human Resources and Labor Relations, Tracy Flynn Bowe, Media Technicians, Paul Novak and Gordy Scott. Custodian on site is Steve Hain. The following cabinet members and staff are virtually present: Director of Community Engagement and Communications, Tammy DeLand; Director of Equity Services, Ayan Omar; Executive Director of Community Education, Adam Holm; Executive Director of Learning and Teaching, Lori Posch; Executive Director of Research, Assessment and Enrollment, Donna Roper; Executive Director of Student Services, Special Education, Carol Potter; Executive Assistant, Jan McGuire; and Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Education, Dr. Lori Putnam. I missed you, right?
Yay.
It's age. I just wind up, I can't get through this thing without.
It's a lot harder than it looks. I've had to sit there before. I really do. I'm sincere about that. Okay, next we're looking for approval of tonight's Board of Education meeting and work session agenda.
So
moved. Second.
Sorry, and I didn't pay attention. Dr. Green, did you say Monica was here?
Yes, I
She
did.
got in.
Yeah, see, you're
Okay.
getting as bad as I am.
Yeah, I am. Okay, so I'll say I have a motion by Natalie and a second by Scott. Les, can you please call roll again?
Scott Andreasen.
Here.
Yes.
Les Green is yes. Shannon Hawes.
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz.
Yes.
Thank you. Next is the consent agenda. The consent agenda consists of non-controversial items that the board adopts routinely without debate. Any single member may remove an item from the consent agenda by requesting removal at the time the consent agenda is moved for adoption. On tonight's consent agenda, item A, approval of personnel staff changes. Item B, approval of monthly treasurer's report for February 2022. Item C, approval of monthly financial report for February 2022. Item D, bid award, North Canopy Improvements. Item E, Catherine Johnson Education Center project change order totaling $206,000. Item F, contingent resolution relating to choosing nominees for election to the school board and calling the school district primary election. Item G, resolution establishing dates for filing affidavits of candidacy. And that's all of them. Does any board member wish to remove an item from tonight's consent agenda?
Number F.
Number F? Okay. So looking for then a motion to approve items A through E plus G.
So move.
And then can I get a second? A second one?
Second.
Okay. So, Dr. Green, can you please call roll for items A through E and G?
Monica Segura Schwartz,
Yes.
Shannon Hawes.
Yes.
Les Green. Natalie Copeland.
Yes.
Scott Andreasen.
Yes.
Okay, and then item F, the contingent resolution relating to choosing nominees for election to school board and calling the school district primary election. It sounds more confusing than it really is, and I bet Amy can summarize that. If that's what you were asking, Scott, could you
Yes,
explain
please. I
that?
have no idea what you're talking about.
So this is one of those resolutions that we have to do every time we have an election. The reason it sounds confusing is because it's contingent depending on how many candidates file. So we're part of the primary system, but we only have to hold a primary if a certain number of applicants file to run for school board. If we don't have that number that requires it, then we don't do it. So that's why it's a contingent resolution.
Thank you. That helps.
Okay, looking for a motion to approve item F then?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Natalie, a second by Scott. Les, can you call roll one more time?
Natalie Copeland.
Yes.
Scott Andreasen.
Yes.
Les Green is yes. Shannon Hawes.
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to discussion and action items. First up is an action item is the 2022-2023 Compensatory Revenue Plan presented tonight by Amy Scalarud, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services.
Good evening, Chair Hawes, Superintendent Jett, members of the board. This is our first step in our upcoming budget process. So this is something that the board approves every year, and we've been doing this for about the last 5 years, where we can, in accordance with state statute, designate a portion of our compensatory revenue at the district-wide level to support a district-wide board-approved plan versus allocating it by site. And so statute allows up to 50%. We have, again, for the last number of years, allocated 25%. There is information in the board packet that outlines the various positions that this funds. It's a combination of co-teaching positions, chemical dependency counselors, EL supports, bar programming, just a number of areas that are additional supports for our students. You will see up on the screen our 2022-23 compensatory allocation is just over 13 million. The 25% of that equates to approximately 3,285,000, and that funds 36.5 FTEs. This plan is very consistent with last year. There are no new positions. The number of positions in each of the areas is very consistent. And so this is an action item looking for approval. Are there any questions on the 2022-23 compensatory plan? So I just wanted to make sure everyone could see the amounts. This is what's attached in the board agenda, so it goes. Because nothing's changed from last year, I wasn't intending to go over those in detail, but if there are questions on any of those items, as members were reviewing the board packet, we can certainly go over those at this point.
This is part of the 3 million is what we're funding these positions with?
Correct. So the 3 million is what we're holding back to allocate on a district-wide level as opposed to allocating it to a specific site.
Okay. So the rest of the money is being used specific sites?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Monica?
So I'd like to make a motion to approve compensatory revenue plan.
I will second.
Amy, can I just say, out there in the news, there's a lot of stress in districts and finances, and I'm so appreciate having you here.
Thank you.
There are those who would differ with you, who want to get something. The first word out of her mouth is no, and then she slaps your hand for asking.
I have a button in my office that actually says it for me.
Saves you a little time. Just press the button. Okay, so we have was that a motion by Monica and a second by Natalie? Any further discussion? Dr. Green, can you please call roll?
Monica Segura Schwartz,
Yes.
Natalie Copeland,
Yes.
Scott Andreasen,
Yes.
Shannon Hawes,
Yes.
Les Green is yes.
Thank you. Okay, next up, this one is a discussion item. The 2022-2023 FTE projections based on enrollments and registrations presented by Tracy Flynn Bowe, Executive Director of Human Resources.
Chair Hawes, board members, Superintendent Jett. This is part of our annual staffing process. We like to provide the board with a summary of changes in FTE by grade level at the elementaries and then by department level at the secondaries. This is the culmination of, I would say, about 2 months of hard work by all of the cabinet members and school leaders across the district. You'll see elementary level that there are really no changes. The only change you see is that negative in kindergarten of 4 FTEs. And I would just let board members know that you see that each time we present this report because the enrollments for kindergarten are never clear until we get closer to the start of the school year. So that's not a reduction. We will hire teachers. We will have them standing in the ready. We just need to know which school they'll be going to. So you see that -4 in terms of kindergarten positions. In the secondary level, those FTE allocations are based on enrollments of our secondary students. And so those will vary from year to year depending on course offerings and students' elections. I'll give you a minute to look through that list by department and let us know if you have any questions.
I had one question. You're showing change, but what are the actual FTEs for each of these items?
So I don't have that information in front of me, but I do have that. So if there's a particular area that you're interested in or you want to see that information, you and I can connect and I can get that to you, Scott.
Okay, that'd be good. Change means nothing if you don't know what the base is.
Right, this is the format that the board had asked for this report in. And so we have followed that format for all of these years. We certainly can change it. We can do it differently.
Yeah, Scott, if they give me a number of 5, I don't know what 5.0, what that means to me. So when I see a change, then I can tell, is it going up or down?
Let's do
But I
both.
get that, yep.
Let's do both.
Yeah, and I think historically what the board members were wanting to be sure is that they could see if there was a significant drop in any particular department or in any particular grade level.
Okay, let's do both.
Sure. Any other questions about the FTE report? You'll see at the bottom, we have our nursing and special educations listed as TBD. Those, as you probably understand, are really dynamic numbers, and they're really hard to assign at this time of the year with all of the work that's happening with students' assessments and evaluations and determining which students will be in which buildings and those kinds of things.
And then this isn't, we don't need a vote on this? You're just presenting? Okay,
Just an information item.
all right, thank you. Oh, Monica?
So just to reiterate, this means that we're pretty much the same, correct?
It does, yes.
And I'm just seeing that we have 0 changes in health and science and Spanish. So is that because kids are the same number of kids are taking those classes, and those are electives, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Next, we move on to reports. We have Board of Education Standing Committee reports. I believe we have 2 reports tonight, Board Development Policy and Governance Committee. Chair Monica Segura Schwartz, do you have a report?
Just a quick report. We went very quickly over I'm going very quickly over the report. We didn't go very quickly. We did the revised proposed policies that we'll have here. So that's why I'll go very quickly. And the other thing that we did is that we reviewed the agenda items that had been proposed by board members. And in some of the reviews, some of the things were clarified about those agendas. So we don't have any agenda item proposed right now and the other ones were taken care of before. So we're good with that.
Can I ask one question on that? So there's been one agenda item that's sort of been coming or been discussed for a while, was the student participation on the board level. I didn't quite understand. Are you still in discussions about that? Is that where?
No, that agenda item, I'm going to say that it did not get to our list. So I'm sorry about that. I apologize. It was not discussed in our board
Okay, so,
in that one.
okay,
So we will bring it back to agenda item.
okay, thank you. Okay, and then Personnel Negotiations Committee, Chair, Dr. Les Green.
We met, the administration provided an update on current search processes and we have 2 open assistant principal positions that are underway for secondary and elementary, 1 for each. The committee also received a staff hiring update, and despite a difficult labor market, the HR department reports that applications are up 100% since January and February, and we are now fully staffed in many of our support positions. However, we continue to face shortages in special education, paraeducators. By the way, just from the first time I've said that word, paraeducators, I think has replaced paraprofessionals, just for information purposes. It's a better word to use, I think, too, if that means anything. Behavior support staff positions, and this is the current focus of our hiring efforts. We are hosting job fairs at school sites and will be represented next week in the teacher job fair at the Minneapolis Convention Center. The committee also reviewed the preliminary draft of the board report on projected changes in FTE based on enrollments and registration, which we just went over with Tracy today or this evening. Committee reviewed the supervision relationships between district leaders and family members to ensure compliance with Board Policy 495, nepotism and employment. I will be sending a memo to you, to the chair soon, or you have it. I guess it's, that we did review that and find it to be in good shape. Administration reviewed the process for non-renewal of probationary teachers per Minnesota statutes 12-2A.40, which will come into the board by resolution on April 20th of 2022. Everybody knows there's groups of teachers whose contracts have reached the 3-year point of tenure, and so we have to decide. And it's also wrapped up in budget things, so. And see, I told Tracy I would say too much. She left. She didn't want to hear it. And I would tell you, it's always, for those who've been here long enough, it is not a good time for us to tell people that, we don't have enough money or something of that nature, and that they have to find other jobs. So it's a very personal person-to-person kind of thing for most of us when we think about it. So, all right, I'll let it go. Thank you. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
Scott,
How are we doing on bus drivers?
I want you to know I am not putting up with that. You are giving me crap. I'm not sure, but I will refer that to Tracy.
Gary Ganji to answer that
Gary's
question.
ready.
Oh, good. How are we doing on bus drivers?
We are still, we're still looking for bus drivers. We had a couple new applicants, one in the hiring pipeline, and I'm happy to report that we have a bus driver who retired to be a snowbird to go south for the winter, who came back and dropped off his paperwork today to start driving again, to help us out this spring. So although we aren't to the point where I would say we're flush with drivers, we're surviving.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next, we're moving on to future agenda items. At this time, does any board member want to suggest any future agenda item? Board Policy Development Governance Committee will review requests and report on their recommendations. So you just have the one that we just talked about that. Okay, so at the April regular board meeting, topics will include Discovery Community Schools presentation, resolution proposing named staff for non-renewal or placement on unrequested leave of absence, and policy readings. Now, our regular board meeting is adjourned. It is 6:57 PM, and we are moving on to our Board of Education work session. First up is schools updates, presented by Dr. Lori Putnam, Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education, and Dr. Mike Brevard, Assistant Superintendent for Elementary Education.
Hawes and members of the board and Superintendent Jett, this evening Dr. Putnam and I are ready to update you on our schools and how things went during the month of March and parts of early April, as we are now in our spring time of the year. At our preschool and elementary, I'll go over some of the things that we have going on here. In our pictures here, we see some of our preschool friends working together. On the left-hand side, we see a student working on an art standard. And the art standard she's working on is purposeful work to create unique products for choosing. And she's doing it through blow art, and that's just fantastic. On the right side, we see our students at Quarry View also working not only on their letters, but also using geometric shapes to create their own patterns. While working at early childhood, we also work on math standards. So what you're seeing here is our preschoolers are doing construction. But while they're doing this, they're using geometry and spatial thinking for our youngest students. They're composing and decomposing shapes for their constructions with increased complexity. And while all of these things seem like they're just having fun with blocks, they're actually working on one of our preschool standards. In other words, they're having fun and learning at the same time. So what do we do with some of these great skills that we are learning? Well, we can't forget about the funds of preschool. Our preschool continued their construction skills and knowledge by talking about the three little pigs. So using this construction, newfound skills, we see our preschoolers here performing the classic tale with a little teaching about why that brick house that they worked on during construction will hold up much better than that straw or stick house. And if you look at that little girl, she seems a little bit concerned about having to go out in front of them, and I'm not sure if she is the pig or if she's just worried about doing her theater production, but it looks like our adult is helping her out. So we had a little more theater happening also at our elementary schools. We've continued our partnership with the Great Theater, and they led our fifth grade students at Westwood in a play in a week. And the play they did was The Lion King. And so after rehearsing from Monday through Thursday with three incredible teaching artists from the Great Theater, the cast of 46 fifth graders performed at 9 o'clock for their peers and then at 6 o'clock for their families. And we received lots of family feedback about how nice it was to be back into school and seeing their kids perform. As our winter comes to an end, though, we see that our students are getting those last few sledding opportunities at Oak Hill. As part of our all-school celebration there, students were outside sliding, taking turns using sleds with their homerooms. While we may cringe at the sight of that snow, and I see Dr. Putnam cringing just a tad, we know that the smiles that we see from our younger kids' faces right there is that they still love the joys of winter. While maybe us adults don't, and I include Superintendent Jett in that comment. Speaking of which, I'll ask you to view these pictures, and you may see Superintendent Jett somewhere. But our awesome Apollo High School basketball players and coaches visited Madison to play basketball and teach skills with our students that won a Bus Buck Challenge. Bus Bucks are awarded to students for excellence in their choices when riding the school bus. This was organized by our Madison PBIS team. So if you look towards that left top corner, I believe that appears to be Superintendent Jett. No, the gentleman to the left. Or that's a super senior, one of the two. So while our preschool and elementary kids had a great month in March, I also wanted to just share some of the remarkable reading skills that we're seeing from our littlest ones. And this is a 4-year-old. Well, we have a little bit of a video, if the video will play for us. So our kids and staff are making great strides, even as we get towards the tail end of the school year. And this 4-year-old is going to show us some of her reading skills and some of the incredible vocabulary that she's already conquered as a 4-year-old, even when she makes a few mistakes. So hopefully this will come and work okay.
Apple. A is for insects.
So A is for insects,
Ants.
but she knew the word insects.
It's for crocodile.
Not crocodile, L's for alligator.
Alligator.
Alligator. Great reading.
A is for astronaut.
You knew an astronaut.
It's for ambulance.
Ambulance. Great reading.
So even though she might have gotten a little bit of clue here and there, she knew him, she knew what an astronaut was. That was fantastic reading as far as I'm concerned for a 4-year-old. So that does conclude what the preschool and elementary had for the month of March.
Thank you, Dr. Rivard. I had to take pictures during a couple of those early slides because part of our strategic plan is to have career and college education starting from our very little. So I had to send that to our GSDC partners, who's texting back right now, because they pulled together all of our employers and our higher ed partners, and I knew how excited they would be to see that amazing art and theater and construction engagement happening already. So thank you for that.
That's awesome.
And I'm happy to share with you our update from our secondary schools and activities. We're going to kick off with Apollo, who are making connections in March and April, not May. They sent 12 students to Kennedy to speak with their 8th graders about all of the positive things going on at Apollo. They talked about academics, athletics, and activities, and they had that we had before, during, and after school. Apollo students were able to meet with small groups, answer questions from the Kennedy students. They played games together outside and were able to socialize together in small groups while eating custard donated by Culver's. So we want to say thank you to our partner down the road. At McKinley, they are increasing their commitment to PBIS, and their students are earning what they call theirs ROAR slip. That's their positive matrix. ROAR slips for modeling PBIS behaviors or positive behaviors. In April, anytime a student earns a ROAR slip, they can tape it to the giant ROAR sign that you see up there. And when all the letters are outlined, their students earn a reward day. And their dedication to PBIS this year has helped the overall climate and decrease in unexpected or problematic behaviors. At Tech High School, they are serving community. Here you can see some of our National Honor Society students who connected with Catholic Charities, and they collected over 750 pounds of food to distribute to our community, and they're also coordinating an upcoming blood drive for students and 742 staff. Here you can see Kennedy Community School celebrating together. They had their middle level after school party on April 1st, which just seems to me like they were asking for it, but Principal Wilhite must be braver than I to have a middle school after school party on April for Fools, but she did it, and it was a successful event, and it was to celebrate the hard work of that community and to bring people together. South recently had their first all-school in-person event in 2 years, so they're very excited about that. Nearly 100 South students and families participated in their family night at South. During family night, they had the opportunity to meet South coaches and advisors and participate in fun activity within the areas of track, baseball, and softball. Activities included a running speed test, the long jump, batting cage hitting, and pitching speed radar. And again, this was for the whole family, so we had from littles to bigs there. And at the end, students who were in our middle school could register for a middle level activity at the end of the event. Other opportunities included an art activity, showcasing our 21st Century Learning Grant with United Way, MCA reading, math, and science preparation tips for both students and families, and all students got a free book to take home and read. Dreamline staff were available to discuss how they support students during the day and after school. SRO Jason Larson presented on safe social media use, and chemical dependency counselor Tanya Klug presented on what parents should know regarding chemical use in teens. It was a fun and engaging event, and the pizza served by the South 8th grade web crew certainly helped. We wanted to show you some highlights from Apollo and Crush. Congratulations to the Apollo track and field team for their performance at the Indoor CLC Championship on Saturday. The Eagles were top 3 in several events, so it certainly bodes well for a successful season. Their speech team competed at the section tournament on Friday, and several students made it to the finals and placed 5th and 6th. Their theater program is busy preparing for the spring play. They'll be performing The Plot Like Gravy Thickens. This play breaks the fourth wall and interacts with the audience as they help investigate a murder. So certainly we will not want to miss that. I'm glad some of you appreciated that. I did too. And then we had Kellen Hanzik-Brill, who you'll hear in a moment at the next slide, was selected as our Region 8 AA winner for the AAA Award. And they want to just give a shout out to Kellen's excellence and achievement in academics, music, and athletics. And now we are going to hear from both Kellen Hanzik-Brill and Lily Weitzel at the Apollo Music Festival that recently took place. And we welcome any questions that you have this evening.
Any questions or comments?
Musicals typically have taken place in the fall, so this they do typically one-act plays in the spring.
A lot to be proud of. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to our list of policies. First up tonight, we have proposed revised Board Policy 609, first reading. It is the Public Education and Organized Religion, presented tonight by Dr. Mike Rivard, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education.
Did we do 607? I think that one was first.
Oh, sorry.
That's right.
Let's do 607, Organization of Grade Levels, first reading. I lost a sheet.
Thank you, Chair Hawes, members of the board, Superintendent Jett. We were kind of ready with the flip of the page. We were to go to either one. So we will start out with Board Policy 607, which was last reviewed in October of 2018. The district administration, along with our board development committee, are making a recommendation to change to have us better aligned for this policy with MSBA's 2022 revision. And that is in relationship to the documentation that verifies a student falls within the school's minimum and maximum age requirements for admission to a publicly funded kindergarten, preschool, kindergarten, or grades 1 through 12. And it outlines some of the documentation that is needed when children do register within the school district. And that's based on the statute that was changed in 2018 regarding verification of age for admission to public schools. So those are the recommendations that we're making for changes. Beyond that, the general statement of this policy and purpose is to address the grade level organization of our schools within the school district, and we recommend no other changes at this time.
Natalie?
I'm interested in how you use a baptismal or religious certificate to know how old a child is.
I think based on what we saw within the MSBA's policy, it would be utilizing the date that they have on there for the date of birth for that child as one form that we would use in determining the child's age for being 5 years old, which is regarded for the compulsory attendance law.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rivard.
So you're adding that whole paragraph in there, and it didn't exist before, correct?
That is correct.
Any other questions? All right. Moving along, now we'll move on to 609. Go ahead.
And Board Policy 609 is even easier. This is our public education organized policy for 609. Again, no changes recommended from October 2018, except for one. And at that time, when the policy was written, the responsibility of enforcing or putting this policy in place to ensure that the study of religious materials, customs, beliefs, and holidays in the school district was keeping within the guidelines that were outlined in 2018. At that time, we had the assistant superintendent noted, and to better match up with the other policies that we have, we'd like to change that to say superintendent or designee. Beyond that, no other recommendations.
Okay. Are we good? Okay, moving on then. Thank you, Dr. Rivard. Next up, we have proposed revised board policy 701, and that is the establishment and adoption of school district budget. Of course, presented by Amy Scalarud, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services.
Hello again. So I have a number of policies with pretty minor changes for the most part. The first one is Board Policy 701. You'll see on the last page of the policy in the legal references is the only change being proposed. That is a statute that was repealed a number of years ago, and so we obviously need to remove a legal reference to a statute that is no longer in force. So that is the only change for this policy.
Okay. Then first reading of a policy, Board Policy 703, Annual Audit.
This policy, again, one minor change on the second page. The second page refers to the Minnesota Legal Compliance Guide. That is a publication that gets put out by the state, and they have changed the name of that to Minnesota Legal Compliance Audit Guide. So again, that is the only change for this policy, just correcting the name of that publication.
You are making this really easy. Gary's going to be so proud of me and you. Okay, next up, Board Policy 704, first reading, development and maintenance of an inventory of fixed assets and fixed assets accounting system.
This one, again, very minor changes. We included in our policy a list of depreciation, number of lives that we use for the audit. We have land included in that table, which is not depreciable, and so there's really no reason to leave that on the table. And then in addition, we have books. Our capital asset threshold is $5,000, and so we clearly aren't going to likely purchase a book that exceeds that individual threshold, and so there's really no need to keep that in the depreciation table either. So those have been removed. And then one minor change in the reporting. The original policy calls for an inventory to be presented to the board. After review at Board Finance, they felt like receiving an entire list of all of the district's assets didn't necessarily provide value. Of course, that information is there if a board member were to request it or have an interest in that. But we do already provide a summary of all of the fixed assets as part of the audit. And so we changed the language to reflect what we're really doing in practice. And those are the only changes.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay, moving along then, we have for Board Policy 714, fund balances.
So this is the fund balance policy. A few changes here. This is probably the one that has the most changes, although still only a few slight changes. The minimum fund balance section, our current policy previously had 8% as a minimum. Board Finance Committee is recommending an increase to 10%. The 8% was established a number of years ago when we were significantly under that, and even the 8% felt like a rather unachievable target. We are currently in excess of 12%, and so the recommendation is to increase that minimum to 10%. A slight change on the following page, just to correct the title, to correct what the accurate title is when we did some title changes a few years ago. And then in the review section, the current policy, which is what MSBA's policy has, calls for an annual review of the minimum fund balance percentage. Board Finance Committee felt that if we did that on the 3-year cycle in conjunction with the review of the policy itself, that would be sufficient. Of course, it wouldn't preclude the board or Finance Committee from making a recommendation to change it outside of that 3-year cycle, but that we wouldn't necessarily need to be bringing that forward on an annual basis, which is not something that we've been doing in practice anyway. And so this really aligns the wording, again, with what we're actually doing in practice with the policy review cycle.
Within the Finance Committee, could we do it annually?
Oh, yep, absolutely, we could. And we really do informally, not as a formal policy review, but we do discuss that minimum fund balance percentage and where we're at in relation to it as part of the audit. So it's not a in-depth discussion or review, but certainly we're having that discussion on an annual basis as part of the audit. So we're kind of informally doing it, just not, a formal review.
Thank you.
Natalie?
I was just curious about state level of what you want your minimum fund balance percentage to be, or is it kind of all over the place?
So the state doesn't issue any sort of recommendation. 8 to 12, somewhere in the 8 to 12% range is what you typically see, particularly for a district our size. When you start to get into some smaller districts, they might set that higher. The statewide average right now is about 20%, but you really tend to see the smaller districts with significantly higher than that, just because in terms of what that equates to as far as dollars, if they were to have, a significant building issue or something that would be unforeseen, they don't have the same amount of dollar protection when you compare it on a percent basis. So that statewide average gets a little bit skewed in that it's quite a bit higher. When you start to look at the larger districts, that 8 to 12% is generally going to be your target.
Thanks, Amy.
Okay. Then we have first reading for Board Policy 721, Uniform Grant Guidance Policy regarding federal revenue sources.
So this is a really long policy, but there is only 2 slight changes on the second page. And this is a policy that really mirrors the federal uniform grant guidance. That is the guidance that we follow in relation to any of our federal grants. And so they outline the policy for what they require for procurement. They consider a micro purchase. Previously, it was $3,000. It's being increased to $10,000. That is the threshold for anything that we purchase with federal funds that we need to get quotes for. The Minnesota law sets that threshold at $25,000. So you'll see when we move to the next board policy that our general policy based on Minnesota law is $25,000. However, if we're making that purchase using federal funds, then we need to follow this guidance. So that's the change in Part E1. E2 refers to the kind of next category of purchases, which we're leaving this policy to be the federal guidance, which is increasing it from 150,000 to 250, where you would actually need to do more of an actual procurement process. This will never come into play for us. As a Minnesota district, our law is 175,000 for bid, so we have a more restrictive policy and rule to follow in this category, but we leave the policy to match the federal guidance, just in case, if for some reason the state were to change that guidance and significantly increase that to a point above the 250, then we would use the 250 for federal purchases. And that is the only changes in this policy.
Any questions or comments? Thank you, Amy. And that was from grant guidance. So we have one more then. Board Policy 740, first reading, changing it to 798, yes? Purchasing
Yes.
procedures, soliciting prices, bids, and quotations.
So I'll explain the renumbering briefly first. We have this numbered as policy 740. MSBA does not have a sample policy for purchasing procedures. And so generally our numbering format states that when there isn't an MSBA policy and it's a district policy, we would utilize 799. We already have 799, so then we number backwards. So Finance Committee is recommending changing this to 798 so that it's clearly indicated that it's not an MSBA kind of standard policy. The first change in this policy is to the same change we just discussed, to change that federal purchase threshold from the 3,000 to the 10,000. And then the second change is in sections 6 and 7, which are kind of intertwined together. The last time this policy was reviewed and revised, the district did not have procedures in place for board approval of joint purchasing contracts. And so at the time, the policy was rewritten to say the district will implement procedures to notify and/or approve when we are purchasing off of those joint purchasing contracts where we don't need to go through a formal sealed bid process. We have since implemented those procedures. We've had those procedures in place for a number of years. And so we're really just removing the language that says that will be implemented to state that board approval is required based on that same $175,000 threshold, whether it's a bid or a joint purchasing contract. And we wanted to clarify too that construction contracts, while we don't utilize in construction contracts off joint purchasing contracts, if for some reason we were, or there was an instance where we wanted to do that on an emergency basis, we wanted it to be clear that we're not just talking about individual items. The board approval would still be required if it was a construction-related contract. And then Section 7 was essentially saying that if it wasn't in the budget, it needs to be approved by the board. The language now in 6 is stating that it already needs to be approved by the board under any circumstance, whether it was in the original budget or not, it comes to the board for approval. So the Section 7 is really no longer necessary. Any questions?
Wow, nice job.
Short and sweet.
Good. All right. So this meeting is adjourned. It is 7:25 PM. Thank you for watching and have a good night. Thank you.
How are you doing? Good. Yeah.
When did you get back in?
3. I got here like at 3:30. Yeah.